I remember the scent of peonies in the air, the way the sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting rainbows across the pews. My dress fit like a dream, delicate lace, a train long enough to make any girl feel like royalty. My heart fluttered with anticipation as the music swelled. I clutched my bouquet tighter, steadying myself with one deep breath. This was it. My moment. Our forever. Caleb stood at the altar, handsome and calm in his navy tux, his smile steadying me more than anything. Our eyes met, and I saw everything we had dreamed of: our first home, Sunday mornings with pancakes, bedtime stories whispered between us, and our future child. Our child. The secret I'd planned to share with him tonight, the moment it was just the two of us. I thought it would be a moment of joy, a beginning. But the beginning never came. Just as the officiant lifted his book, the doors of the chapel flung open. A hush swept over the crowd. All 250 guests turned. My pulse raced. Evelyn, Caleb's mother. She stormed down the aisle like a specter cloaked in disdain, clutching papers in one trembling hand. "I can't let this farce continue," she shouted, voice echoing through the silence. "That baby, Lena's baby, isn't Caleb's." The room seemed to tilt. My breath caught, mouth going dry. I turned to Caleb, searching his face for disbelief, for anger on my behalf. For anything. Instead, I sought out confusion. Hurt. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Caleb asked, but his voice lacked the fire I needed to hear. He looked from me to her, then back again. "Lena, tell me this isn't true." My bouquet dropped. I stepped forward, voice shaking. "It's not true. Caleb, I swear, it's yours. I was going to tell you tonight. I just wanted it to be special." Evelyn thrust the papers forward. "Paternity results," she spat. "Proof." He took them. He actually took them. I watched his hands tremble as he read, lips moving silently over whatever garbage she had conjured up. I wanted to scream, to rip them from his hands and set them on fire. But I stood frozen, shame crawling over me like a sickness. He looked up slowly, eyes wet. "You lied to me." "No." I stepped forward again, desperate. "She's lying. Caleb, please." "Why would I ever?" But he stepped back. The silence after that was deafening. I could hear my heartbeat thudding in my ears, the guests whispering behind me, the distant sound of someone stifling a gasp. I reached for him, but he turned. Walking down the aisle his mother had just stormed through, leaving me there, abandoned in front of everyone I loved, in front of the future we were supposed to share. The officiant closed his book. My father stood from the front row, face pale as he stepped toward me. The walk down the aisle was longer than I remembered, every eye on me as I tried to hold back tears, dragging the weight of the dress I once loved behind me like a shroud. The limousine that had been meant to take Caleb and me to our reception became my escape vehicle. I climbed in alone, the driver unsure whether to offer condolences or silence. I chose the latter, curling into myself on the back seat, staring at my reflection in the tinted glass. The bride with mascara streaks and trembling lips was not the girl who had walked into the chapel an hour ago. Back at the house, the door opened before I could knock. My mother pulled me into her arms, whispering words I couldn't process. My father's jaw clenched tight, the vein in his temple pulsing as he helped lift my train over the threshold. "We're going to get through this," he said, and I wanted so badly to believe him. I spent the rest of the night in what used to be my childhood room, peeling off the dress piece by piece. The silence was unbearable, broken only by my own sobs and the echo of Evelyn's accusation looping through my head. "That baby isn't Caleb's." The lie tasted bitter every time I replayed it. I sat in front of my old vanity, eyes bloodshot, belly resting gently under my palm. "You're loved," I whispered. "You're mine. And no matter what anyone says, I will protect you." The world outside spun with rumors and whispers. My phone buzzed endlessly, texts, missed calls, messages from guests, from tabloids, from strangers. But not from Caleb. Not once. He believed her. Without proof. Without even asking me directly. Evelyn had taken everything: my love, my dignity, my wedding day, and burned it all to the ground. And he let her. But as the sun began to rise, casting gold light through the curtains of my old bedroom, something inside me hardened. I looked down at my stomach, at the tiny life growing there, and I knew I couldn't fall apart. She had declared war. And I wasn't going to be collateral damage. Not me. Not my child. I would stand tall, even if I had to rebuild everything from the rubble she left behind. The wedding may not have happened, but I was still standing. And I was not alone. The news broke before I even had a chance to grieve in peace. By morning, my face was everywhere, splashed across social media, gossip blogs, even the local news in Hollow Creek. Jilted bride, paternity scandal, small-town wedding turns to chaos. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them cared to ask the truth. None of them knew that I was still in my childhood bed, clutching a heating pad to my stomach and trying to breathe through waves of sadness I hadn't known a person could physically feel. My parents tried their best to shield me. My father, Martin, took my phone and turned off all alerts. My mother, Joyce, sat with me every morning, her hands brushing back my hair, her presence reminding me I wasn't completely broken. I hadn't been here since high school, and yet it was the only place that felt remotely safe now. They didn't ask questions or press for details. They just held me in the stillness, letting me feel every jagged edge of heartbreak without judgment. But outside these walls, the world was cruel. People who had once smiled at me in bakeries now whispered when I passed. I saw their judgment in every sideways glance, every fake smile stretched too tight. Hollow Creek was a small town. Secrets didn't last here, but lies spread like wildfire. And Evelyn had poured gasoline on everything. There were rumors that I'd cheated. That I'd tried to trap Caleb with a fake pregnancy. That I'd known the child wasn't his and went through with the wedding anyway. Even my OB/GYN's office called to confirm my appointment, given the circumstances, as if my prenatal care had suddenly become a public affair. My hands shook as I hung up the phone. Caleb remained silent through it all. Not a text. Not a call. Not even a denial of Evelyn's story. That silence was worse than anything else. He didn't even care enough to ask me directly if it was true. He let her lie, and he walked away. Some mornings I woke up thinking I had imagined the whole thing. I'd expect to hear Caleb's laugh from the kitchen or find his shirt draped over my chair. But then I'd feel the weight of my belly, still small but firm, and I'd remember. I'd remember the look in his eyes as he turned away from me. How easily he believed the worst. I started writing in a journal, not just for myself, but for the baby growing inside me. A little boy. A son. My son. I wrote about what had happened, about the love I'd once felt for Caleb, about the devastation of being left behind. I wrote down memories, hopes, dreams. Every time I touched pen to paper, I felt a little stronger. Like I was reclaiming something Evelyn had tried to take. One night, as I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, my mother brought me a warm mug of tea. She didn't say anything at first, just sat next to me and watched the stars. Then, quietly, she said, "They don't know you, Lena." Not really. But we do. And we're proud of the way you're walking through this. I swallowed the lump in my throat. It doesn't feel like I'm walking. It feels like I'm crawling. Doesn't matter, she said gently. Forward is forward. That became my mantra. Forward is forward. Even when it was hard to get out of bed, I reminded myself that each breath, each small act of care, each journal entry was a step. I began to take morning walks. I cooked with my mom, rediscovering recipes I hadn't touched since college. I let my dad show me how to sand down an old dresser for the baby's room, even though we laughed through most of it as he critiqued my heavy-handedness. My belly grew, and with it, so did something fierce inside me. I couldn't let this be the end of my story. My son deserved a mother who fought for the truth, who didn't crumble under shame that didn't belong to her. So I started making quiet calls. Contacting a lawyer, requesting copies of those supposed documents Evelyn had shown. Something inside me refused to believe she had anything real. The timing, the theatrics, it all screamed fabrication. But now I wanted proof. For me. For my child. My lawyer agreed. If those documents were falsified, we'll know, he said. And if she distributed them publicly, that's defamation. There it was. A word that gave shape to my rage. I wasn't just a victim, I had rights. And I would use them. That night, I pulled the covers up to my chin, curled my hand protectively over my stomach, and whispered softly, I don't care how loud they get. I'll be louder for you. The headlines might have called me a scandal, but they didn't see the strength I was building day by day. Caleb may have abandoned me, but I wasn't abandoned. I had family. I had truth. And most importantly, I had my son. They thought they'd buried me. But I wasn't a broken bride. I was a mother now. And I was just beginning. The morning I went into labor was quiet, almost peaceful. A late spring rain tapped gently against the windows, and the air smelled like lilacs from the bushes just beyond the porch. I just folded the last of the tiny onesies and placed them in the dresser Dad helped me refinish. There was no dramatic water breaking, no mad dash to the hospital. Just a slow, undeniable pressure and a deep knowing that it was time. Time to meet the boy who had already changed my life without uttering a single word. Mom rushed around the house with a calm panic only mothers seemed to master. Dad loaded the car while calling the hospital and double-checking the route, even though we'd practiced it 3 times already. As for me, I sat in the back seat breathing through the contractions, hand on my belly, whispering steady reassurances to the little life inside me. We've got this, sweetheart. Just you and me. The labor was long. 14 hours of breathing, pushing, waiting, hurting, praying. At some point, the hospital room felt like a planet of its own, orbiting around one mission, bring him safely into the world. And then, just past 2 a.m., he was here. They placed him on my chest, and everything stopped. The pain, the noise, the past, all of it faded when I saw his face. A perfect little swirl of dark hair, soft lashes brushing cheeks already fuller than I expected. He blinked up at me like he'd been waiting to meet me all along. Theodore Walsh, I whispered. My Theo. I didn't think I could cry anymore after the last few months, but there they were, tears pouring from a place so deep I didn't even know it existed. I traced the tiny curve of his ear, the dip of his chin, and my breath caught. He looked like Caleb. Undeniably, unmistakably like Caleb. The same eyes, the same jawline, even the way his mouth set in sleep, he was his father's son. And yet, he was mine. Mine in a way no one could question. Mine in a way no document could falsify. Mine in every heartbeat I felt inside me for 9 months and every breath I'd take for the rest of my life. The hospital stay blurred into soft hours of nurses checking vitals, my mom cooing over Theo, and my dad holding him like he was cradling the last star in the sky. We took photos, laughed at Theo's tiny sneezes, and memorized every inch of his perfect little face. Not once did we mention Caleb. It was an unspoken agreement. This time was sacred. It belonged to Theo and to me. Back home, the adjustment was overwhelming and beautiful and exhausting all at once. Late-night feedings left me bleary-eyed, but I never resented them. I would rock Theo at 3 a.m. and whisper our story to him, the truth, told gently, told with love. I told him how he was wanted from the very beginning, how brave he'd been already, how I would always fight for him. And every day I wrote. I filled page after page in the journal I started during my pregnancy. It became a letter, a chronicle, a time capsule. Today you smiled for the first time, I wrote. You grinned so wide your dimples showed, and I swear my heart almost burst. I wrote about the nights I cried while holding him, and the mornings I felt new strength rise in me because of him. I wrote about the first time he wrapped his tiny fingers around mine, and how it felt like he was holding my soul. When Theo turned 3 months old, I returned to Silverport. It was a small city an hour from Hollow Creek, far enough from the whispers, but close enough to home. I'd found a remote job in marketing through a friend of my dad's and rented a small, sunlit apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Ours. Balancing motherhood and work was chaotic at first. Some days I took meetings with Theo bouncing in a carrier on my chest. Other days I barely managed to shower. But slowly, I found a rhythm. I created schedules, meal prepped on weekends, and joined a support group for single moms. That's where I met Vanessa and Kayla, 2 women who became lifelines when I needed laughter, advice, or just to know I wasn't alone. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the wedding: confidence. Not just in being a mother, but in myself. In my voice, in my decisions, in the way I was carving out a life from the wreckage. There was power in starting over. Power in knowing that, despite everything, I hadn't let it destroy me. Of course, there were still moments that hurt. Like when I saw a father in the park lifting his toddler into the air and Theo turned his head, watching with wide, wondering eyes. Or when I had to fill out a daycare form and paused at the question, "Father's information." I left it blank. But I refused to let those moments define us. I framed one of Theo's ultrasound pictures and hung it next to a photograph of the two of us, cheek to cheek, his eyes half-lidded in sleep. Above both, I placed a small wooden sign I found at a thrift store. It read, "Rooted in love, grown in grace." That's what we were becoming. This new life wasn't the one I'd planned, but it was honest, it was real, and it was beautiful in its own way. We had morning routines filled with giggles and banana mush, quiet nights with lullabies and dimmed lamps. We had healing. We had hope. And as I rocked Theo to sleep one evening, his breath soft against my collarbone, I whispered into the silence, "They tried to write our ending. But we're just getting started." The day started like any other. Theo had woken up early, bright-eyed and babbling, and we spent the morning stacking blocks and dancing around the kitchen to an oldies playlist. It was one of those rare, golden mornings where everything felt light, where his laughter warmed the whole apartment. I didn't expect the sharp turn the day would take. That's the thing about life, it doesn't always knock before it barrels in. We'd gone to the park, a spot we frequented often in Silverport, tucked beside a cluster of tall trees and lined with benches worn smooth by time. Theo loved the swings most. I'd push him gently, and he'd shriek with joy, his little hands reaching for the sky. I was sitting on the grass, watching him run toward the slide, when it happened. One second he was climbing the steps, and the next he tripped, face first into the mulch, his cry piercing the warm afternoon. I rushed over, heart in my throat, and scooped him up. Blood trickled from a small cut near his eyebrow, and his cheek was already beginning to swell. "We need to go," I murmured, cradling him against me, brushing his curls from his forehead. "You're okay, baby. You're okay." The drive to the emergency room was a blur of red lights and whispered reassurances. I tried to stay calm, but my hands trembled on the wheel. I hated hospitals. They always felt too sterile, too full of memories I didn't want to revisit. And now here I was, clutching my sobbing child, praying he'd be okay. Inside, we were ushered into a pediatric bay, and a nurse handed me ice wrapped in gauze. I pressed it gently to Theo's face as he sniffled into my shoulder. The door creaked open behind us, and I didn't even look up, assuming it was the doctor. But it wasn't. It was Caleb. His voice struck first. "Lena?" I turned, stunned, heart seizing. He stood in the doorway in jeans and a black t-shirt, disheveled, his expression unreadable. And just behind him, Evelyn. Pale, thinner than I remembered. Her skin had lost its glow, and her usual sharp gaze looked clouded with exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice cold, instinctive. Caleb's eyes darted from me to Theo, and something shifted in his face. He stepped forward, slowly, as if the floor beneath him had disappeared. "We're here for my mom. She had some complications." We were in the ER, and I stepped out to get coffee. I couldn't breathe. His eyes locked on Theo. And Theo, my sweet, oblivious Theo, looked up from my shoulder, still teary, still red-faced from the fall. The ice was pressed to his cheek, but it couldn't hide the truth. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. It was like time had looped back, and I was staring at a younger version of Caleb. Same eyes, same brows, same stubborn little mouth. Caleb's lips parted, his face going ashen. He looks like me. I tightened my hold on Theo, who squirmed in my arms. "That's because he is yours," I said quietly, the words finally released into the air between us. Not as a weapon, not as a plea. Just the truth, unvarnished. His expression crumpled, confusion giving way to something deeper, guilt, maybe. Or shame. Lena, why didn't you? Why didn't I what? I snapped, louder now, heart hammering. Tell you? After you left me at the altar? After your mother humiliated me and you walked away without even asking if it was true. He stepped back as if struck. I was hurt. I didn't know what to believe. She had fake documents I cut in. She had lies. And you didn't even come to me. You didn't give me a chance. Theo stirred again, and I looked down, softening my voice. It's okay, baby. We're okay. I pressed a kiss to his temple and turned away from Caleb. You shouldn't be here. But he didn't move. His voice was barely a whisper now. How old is he? Almost 2, I said. You do the math. He looked devastated. I never stopped thinking about you. About that day. I hated myself, but I thought that it was easier to believe her than face the truth. I snapped. The door opened again, and a nurse walked in, clearly sensing tension but saying nothing. She ushered me and Theo toward the exam room, and I followed, holding my son tight, refusing to look back. The doctor cleaned Theo's cut, said it didn't need stitches, just some butterfly bandages and monitoring for swelling. As I cradled him, rocking him gently while he drifted off, I felt the aftershocks of the moment I'd just walked through. Caleb had seen him, really seen him, and something had cracked in his carefully built wall of denial. When we stepped back into the hallway, Caleb was gone. I walked past Evelyn's room without looking in. Back in the car, I buckled Theo into his car seat, brushing his curls back and whispering, "You were so brave, little love." But my mind was racing. The past had caught up with me in that ER. Caleb had seen the truth in his son's face. And there was no going back now. Not for him. Not for me. And certainly not for Theo. I didn't expect a knock on the door 3 days later. Theo was napping, the apartment finally still, my coffee cooling on the windowsill. I had been writing in his journal again, trying to put into words what happened at the hospital, what it meant that Caleb had looked into our son's face and seen himself. I hadn't yet decided how I felt about it. Then the knock came. Not a delivery, not the usual polite rap of a neighbor. It was hesitant, soft, but persistent. I opened the door and there he was. Caleb stood like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. He held a folded piece of paper in his hand, one I recognized instantly, a photocopy of the supposed paternity test Evelyn had shown at the wedding. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed. I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit. Just stood in the center of my living room, glancing around at the toys scattered on the rug, the sippy cup on the coffee table, the framed photos of Theo on the walls. All proof of the life I had built without him. She told me everything, he said at last. His voice was barely audible. She came clean. I waited. I wasn't going to help him out of this. Caleb unfolded the paper. What she showed me that day, it's fake. She admitted it. She paid someone to forge it. There was never a test done. She never had access to any of your medical records. It was all a lie. I exhaled slowly. Not with surprise, I'd known it was fake all along, but with the weight of validation finally pressing itself out of my lungs. Why? I asked, though I knew the answer. He looked at me then, really looked. She said she was afraid. That she was losing me. That if I married you, had a child with you, she'd no longer be needed. She said you'd take me away. She was right, I said flatly. Because that's what happens when someone builds a family. They make new space. They grow. And she couldn't handle not being the center of your world anymore. He didn't argue. She's sick, he said after a moment. That day in the ER, she collapsed. The doctors are running tests, but it's her heart. There might be more. It's serious. She said she wanted to make things right. I crossed my arms. She wanted to make things right the moment she thought she might die? He flinched. I deserve that. You do, I said. You believed her, Caleb. Without talking to me. Without questioning her. You left me, publicly, cruelly, on the most vulnerable day of my life. And then you disappeared. I know, he said quietly. I was weak. I was scared. She showed me something that played on every fear I had, and I didn't think. I didn't trust you. No, I said. You didn't. He sat then, finally, on the edge of the couch, staring down at his hands. I'm in therapy now. I started after the hospital. I couldn't stop thinking about Theo. About the way he looked at me, like he already knew me. I moved to sit across from him, watching the man I had once loved more than anyone else finally unravel his silence. You hurt me more than anyone ever has, I said, my voice steady but low. And still, you walk in here and expect what? I don't expect anything, he said quickly. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I'd like a chance to get to know him. To earn something back. Even if it takes years. I didn't respond immediately. My mind was on Theo, napping just down the hall, unaware that his father was in the next room confessing to the destruction his choices had caused. My heart was conflicted. Part of me still burned with betrayal. Another part felt relief. And deeper still, there was something quieter, hope, maybe, or the ghost of it. I'm not saying yes, I said slowly. But I'm not saying no. He looked up. There will be conditions, I added. Boundaries. You don't get to just drop in and out of his life like a tide. If you're in, you're all in. I am, he said. Whatever it takes. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the low hum of the refrigerator. Caleb reached into his jacket and pulled out a photo. It was one I hadn't seen before, me and him, from our engagement party. He looked young, naive. I looked trusting. He placed it on the coffee table. I carry it, he said. Every day. To remind myself of who I was, and what I did to you. I didn't touch the photo. But I didn't throw it away either. Later, after he left, I checked on Theo. He was still asleep, curled on his side, clutching his favorite blanket. I sat beside him, brushing a curl from his cheek, and whispered, "The truth's out now, baby. And I'm going to make sure it stays that way." The damage had been done. But maybe, just maybe, the healing could begin. The next time Caleb saw Theo, it wasn't at a hospital or a courtroom or in some dramatic moment where everything stood still. It was quiet, controlled, on my terms. I had spent the week following Caleb's confession, weighing every word, every decision. I talked it through with my mom, with my therapist, with the ceiling fan at 2 in the morning when sleep refused to come. Could I trust the man who shattered me? Could I risk letting him into Theo's life, our life, when he had once walked away so easily? The answer didn't come in a neat, tied-up way. It came with Theo's laugh echoing down the hallway as he chased a rubber duck through the tub, his eyes crinkling just like Caleb's used to when he found something truly funny. It came when Theo reached for me after a bad dream and whispered, "Mama, stay." That night I whispered back, "Yes, baby. Always." And I knew. I had to try. Not for Caleb. For Theo. So I set the boundaries. We would meet in a neutral place, an indoor play gym we frequented, colorful and loud and filled with parents who weren't looking at us sideways. Caleb would come for a short visit, no expectations, no pressure. I warned him, if Theo didn't take to him, we'd pause. He agreed. The morning of the visit, I dressed Theo in his favorite green overalls and a striped shirt that made his eyes pop. He was bouncing with excitement, more about the slide than anything else. I, on the other hand, was battling nerves I hadn't felt since that awful day at the chapel. Caleb arrived 10 minutes early. He wore a navy pullover and jeans, clean-shaven, eyes soft with something that looked like awe and fear wrapped into one. He held a little stuffed dinosaur in his hand. "Hi, Theo," he said, voice careful, unsure. Theo blinked at him, head tilted slightly the way he always did when studying someone new. Then he looked at me. I nodded. "This is Caleb," I said gently. "He's a friend." Theo took a moment, then stepped closer and looked up at him. "You bring that for me?" Caleb kneeled, holding out the toy. "I did. His name's Pickles." Theo's entire face lit up. "Pickles." He grabbed the dinosaur, then turned and darted toward the ball pit, shouting, "Mama, look what Pickles can do." I smiled tightly, relief flooding through me like a tide. Caleb watched him, eyes wide. "He's amazing." "He is," I said. "And he's also intuitive. He'll know if this is fake." Caleb nodded, his voice tight. I'm not faking anything. We sat on a bench while Theo ran from the climbing wall to the trampoline to the foam pit and back again, always checking that I was watching, that I was there. Caleb stayed beside me, hands clasped between his knees, taking it all in like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "He's so smart," he murmured. "He already says so much." I smiled. He's always had a lot to say. A few minutes later, Theo came running over, sweaty curls stuck to his forehead, cheeks flushed. He stopped in front of Caleb and tilted his head again. "You coming to bounce?" he asked. Caleb glanced at me. I gave a tiny nod. He stood and followed Theo to the trampoline. I watched as my son jumped and laughed, showing off his spins, while Caleb clapped and hooped like he'd just witnessed an Olympic gymnast. It was surreal. There was joy, yes, but also hesitation. And beneath that, hope. After a while, we sat down to share a snack. Theo climbed into my lap with a juice pouch and a plastic container of goldfish. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Theo looked at him for a long moment, chewing thoughtfully. Then he asked, "Are you my daddy?" My heart stopped. I looked at Caleb, who looked like the floor had dropped beneath him. He blinked hard, once, then turned to Theo. "Yes," he said, voice quiet but clear. "I am." Theo studied him again, then shrugged. "Okay." He popped another goldfish into his mouth. "Pickles says you can play pirates next time." Caleb laughed, really laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years. "Pickles is smart." Theo handed him a few goldfish and said, "You can be Captain Sillypants." I watched them, emotion catching in my throat. I didn't know what this would become. I didn't know how deep the wounds still ran between Caleb and me. But in that moment, I saw something I hadn't expected: acceptance. Forgiveness. Not from me. From Theo. Later, after we packed up and said our goodbyes, Caleb turned to me in the parking lot. "Thank you," he said. "For today. For letting me in." "I'm not doing this for you," I said. "I'm doing this for Theo. But if you keep showing up, keep being honest, maybe there's space for more." "I will," he promised. Every time. As he walked to his car, Theo waved from his car seat. "Bye, Captain Sillypants." Caleb laughed and waved back. "See you soon, first mate." I got into the driver's seat, heart pounding. This wasn't a clean slate. It wasn't a redemption arc wrapped in a bow. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings didn't need to be perfect, they just needed to be real. I didn't expect Evelyn to reach out. After everything, after the wedding, after the lies, after the way she stood in front of hundreds of people and tore my life apart with one forged document and a handful of cruel intentions, I didn't expect anything more from her. So when her handwritten letter showed up in my mailbox, sealed in a pale blue envelope with my name spelled out in her sharp cursive, I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. The letter wasn't long. Just a few shaky lines written in a trembling hand. "Lena, I know I've wronged you more than anyone has a right to. But if there's any grace left in you, I would like to meet Theo. Not to intrude. Not to interfere. Just to say hello. Please consider it. Evelyn." I read it twice. Then I folded it and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I just felt tired. Tired of carrying all of it. The betrayal. The judgment. The weight of always needing to be stronger than I felt. I called Caleb that night. "She wants to meet him." He was quiet on the other end. "You don't have to say yes. Not after everything." "I know," I said. "But I'm going to. With conditions." I laid it all out. The meeting would happen at the Hollow Creek Arboretum, a quiet place filled with winding paths, shaded benches, and flowers Theo loved to sniff dramatically like a little actor. I would be there the entire time. If she crossed a line, even slightly, it was over. When the day arrived, I dressed Theo in his little navy hoodie and khaki pants, his hair combed, but already curling again by the time we buckled into the car. He chattered the whole ride there, excited about feeding the ducks and smelling the squishy yellow flowers, which I assumed were marigolds. Evelyn was already waiting on the bench near the koi pond, hands clasped in her lap. She looked thinner than I remembered, her skin pale and her posture hunched. But her eyes were the same, sharp, piercing, unreadable. Until she saw Theo. I watched her expression shift. It was like someone had knocked the wind out of her. Her lips parted. Her shoulders dropped. She looked at him as if he were the most precious thing she'd ever seen. Theo, for his part, stared at her curiously, clutching his little toy dinosaur under one arm. "Hi," he said simply. "Are you a grandma?" I hesitated, holding his hand gently. "Theo, this is Evelyn. She's your grandma, yes." Evelyn knelt down slowly, wincing as her knees met the path. "Hello, Theodore," she said. "Can I call you Theo?" He nodded, then offered her his dinosaur. "This is Pickles. He's very brave." She took the toy carefully, as if it were something fragile. "Hello, Pickles," she whispered. Then she looked up at me. "Thank you for this." "I know you didn't have to." "I didn't," I said plainly. "But he deserves to know who he comes from. All of it." Theo sat beside her on the bench without hesitation, legs swinging. I sat on the far end, watching every expression on her face, every word that passed her lips. But to my surprise, she didn't try to explain anything. She didn't ask for absolution or turn the moment into a theater for sympathy. She simply listened. Theo told her about his favorite dinosaur books and how he wanted to be a paleontologist. He showed her his favorite way to hop like a frog and asked if she knew how to whistle. She laughed, light and unfamiliar, and admitted she didn't. And then, after a long pause, Theo reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of construction paper. "I made you this," he said shyly. She opened it with trembling fingers. It was a drawing, crayon on paper, all bright, chaotic color. 3 birds holding wings midair under a yellow sun. "That's me," Theo said, pointing to the smallest bird. "That one's Mama. And that one can be you if you want." Evelyn stared at the picture like it was a holy artifact. I would be honored," she whispered. There were tears in her eyes then, and for the first time since I'd known her, they didn't feel performative. They felt real. She folded the drawing with reverence and tucked it into her purse. Then she turned to me. "I'm getting the surgery," she said quietly. I was afraid. I thought I could control everything so I wouldn't lose what I loved. But all I did was ruin it. I nodded slowly. "Therapy?" She met my eyes. "Twice a week. And volunteering at the shelter. I figured if I want a shot at being part of his life, I need to earn it." I didn't forgive her. Not that day. Not completely. But I saw the shift. I saw the weight in her eyes, the way she didn't reach for what hadn't been offered. When we got back to the car, Theo buckled himself in and said, "She's kinda quiet for a grandma." I smiled, brushing his hair from his forehead. Maybe she's learning how to listen. As we drove home, I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, singing softly to himself, Pickles held tight in one hand, and realized something I hadn't before. Forgiveness wasn't a door you opened once. It was a path. A long one, winding and uneven. But maybe we were walking it now. Together. When I agreed to let Caleb visit Theo again, I kept my expectations low. I wasn't expecting miracles, I wasn't expecting closure, and I certainly wasn't expecting healing to look the way it did, slow, layered, sometimes clumsy. But it began anyway, in the soft ways children allow you to start over without holding you hostage to your worst day. Theo didn't demand explanations. He just asked questions like, "Is he coming back tomorrow?" Or, "Can I show him my block tower next time?" His forgiveness was instinctive, free of bitterness. And that was both beautiful and terrifying. The first few visits were short and structured. An hour at the local children's museum. A morning at the library's story time. Caleb always arrived early, always asked what Theo needed, always looked at me with something just shy of apology. But over time, it began to feel less like a performance and more like parenting. Theo responded to it. He started to talk about Caleb during the day. "Caleb says dinosaur tales are for balance," or "Caleb makes the best silly faces." I didn't correct him. I didn't press the title of dad. I let it unfold naturally. One afternoon, while Theo napped, I opened the mailbox to find another envelope with Evelyn's handwriting. This time, it was thicker. Inside was a typed letter, 3 pages long, and at the bottom, signed with her full name, Evelyn Margot Whitmore. It wasn't a plea. It was a confession. She detailed everything. How she'd intercepted a message I'd left for Caleb the night before the wedding, asking to meet early to talk about the pregnancy. How she deleted it from his phone. How she paid a private investigator to fabricate the paternity documents. How she timed her interruption with precision to maximize impact. She admitted that it wasn't about me, or even Caleb. It was about fear of being left, of becoming invisible. There was a line that stayed with me. I thought if I burned the bridge before he crossed it, I could keep him on my side forever. I see now that all I did was leave us stranded. At the end of the letter, she wrote, I don't expect your forgiveness. But if you ever want to show Theo the truth when he's old enough, I want it to come from me. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer where I kept Theo's ultrasound pictures and baby book. I wasn't ready to show it to him. Not yet. But one day I would. And when I did, it wouldn't come from anger. It would come from clarity. Things with Caleb slowly shifted. He began helping with school pickups once a week. He came to pediatrician appointments. He learned Theo's bedtime routine and even helped me build a new bookshelf for Theo's room one Saturday afternoon. We worked beside each other in companionable silence, the kind that speaks of two people who are learning how to coexist without tiptoeing. One night, after reading Theo his favorite bedtime story for the 3rd time, Owl's First Flight, Caleb lingered by the doorway as I tucked Theo in. He's incredible, he said softly. You've done such an amazing job with him. Thank you, I replied, adjusting the covers. I've had help. My parents. Friends. A lot of therapy. Caleb nodded. I've started writing letters. For him. For when he's older. I just want him to know. I didn't walk away because of him. It was never about him. I looked up at him, surprised. That's good. I think that'll mean something someday. He lingered a moment longer, then left, closing the door gently behind him. Outside, Evelyn's transformation continued quietly. She didn't push. She sent small notes, updates on her health, thank you cards after brief visits. One day she sent Theo a children's book about birds with a note that read, You once drew me 3 birds holding wings. I'm learning how to fly again, too. She began volunteering weekly at a women's shelter in Silverport, teaching budgeting classes to women trying to rebuild their lives. I heard about it through someone in my single mothers group. There's this older woman there, one mom had told me. Sharp as a tack. Wears pearls. Makes great banana bread and always says she's making up for lost time. I didn't say anything, but I knew. It was Evelyn. By the time Theo's 4th birthday approached, he was thriving. His preschool teachers said he was curious and kind, with a love of books and a wild imagination. He loved playing pirate captain, demanded dinosaur-shaped pancakes every Sunday, and insisted that bedtime wasn't complete without a kiss from me and a high five from Caleb. And me? I was healing. Not healed, grief and betrayal don't just disappear, but stronger. Grounded. I had rebuilt a life from the ashes Evelyn left behind. And now, the people who'd hurt me were showing up in the only way I would allow, with humility, consistency, and work. Late one evening, after Theo had fallen asleep, Caleb and I sat on the porch, sipping tea in the quiet. He looked at me and said, I know this doesn't erase the past. But I want you to know I'm not going anywhere. Not now. Not ever again. I didn't answer right away. I just nodded slowly, my heart calm. I wasn't ready to say what this meant for us, Caleb and me, but I knew what it meant for Theo. He had both of us now. And we were finally, truly, learning how to build something real. Theo's first school play was called The Wise Forest, and he'd been cast as the owl. A role he took more seriously than I'd ever seen him take anything in his 4.5 years on this earth. For weeks, our apartment echoed with hoots and dramatic proclamations of ancient forest wisdom. He insisted on wearing his costume during dinner, and when I tried to peel it off for laundry, he wailed, but the forest needs me. I'd never seen him so excited. And maybe that's why my nerves were on edge the whole day of the performance. It wasn't just about Theo. It was the first time Caleb, Evelyn, and I would be in the same room together, in public as a family. The auditorium was packed with folding chairs and restless parents clutching programs and camera phones. I saved seats in the second row, close enough for Theo to see my face, but far enough back that he wouldn't feel stage fright. Caleb arrived first, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers. He said owls like the sun, he explained sheepishly as he sat beside me. Not sure where he got that. Sounds like something your son would say, I murmured, lips curving. Evelyn came a few minutes later, dressed in a soft gray shawl and her signature pearls. She looked smaller than she used to, more delicate, but her eyes were clear. She sat on Caleb's other side and offered me a quiet smile. I nodded in return. There was still space between us, but it was no longer scorched earth. It was something livable now. When the lights dimmed and the curtain lifted, the room hushed. Theo waddled onto the stage in his oversized owl costume, feathers glued to felt, cardboard wings flapping with every exaggerated movement, and my heart just about exploded. He turned, eyes scanning the audience until he found us. His face lit up like morning. There's my baby, I whispered, half laughing, half crying. The play was a chaotic, adorable mess. Lines were flubbed. A squirrel tripped over a mushroom prop. One of the trees sneezed mid-monologue. But Theo stood tall in the center of it all, voice clear, posture proud, reciting his lines with the seriousness of a Shakespearean actor. The forest remembers those who listen, he said, bowing deeply at the end. The room erupted in applause. I stood, clapping until my palms stung. Caleb was on his feet too, beaming, and Evelyn dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. After the performance, the kids poured into the hallway, high on applause and sugar cookies. Theo launched into my arms, feathers poking my neck. You were amazing, I said, squeezing him. You were the wisest owl I've ever seen. Caleb crouched down beside us, offering the sunflowers. These are for the forest guardian. Theo gasped, accepting them like they were a knight's sword. Do owls get flowers? They do now, Caleb said. Evelyn stepped forward then, slowly, hands wringing nervously. Theo, she said softly. I brought you something too. From her bag, she pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was handmade, the kind you might find in a tiny craft store. She knelt and held it out. It's your wisdom book, she explained. You can draw your all thoughts in it. Theo stared at it in awe. My all thoughts? Yes, she said. Only the wisest ones. He took it solemnly, then leaned in and hugged her around the neck. Thank you, Grandma Evie. She froze for a second. Then slowly, so gently, she hugged him back. And then she stood and turned to me, pulling a sealed envelope from her coat. This is for you, Lena. I know you read the first letter, but this one is different. It's not about what I did. It's about what I've learned. I took it, fingers brushing hers, and tucked it into my purse. Thank you, I said quietly. Afterward, one of the parents offered to take a photo of us. All four of us. I hesitated. Memories of the wedding flashed like ghosts in the back of my mind, but then I saw Theo, clutching his wisdom book, his flowers, and still beaming from the stage. He was so happy. So I said yes. We stood close, me on one side of Theo, Caleb on the other. Evelyn stood slightly behind, hands gently on his shoulders. And when the shutter clicked, I looked down at my son, at the life we had created, and I didn't feel the grief anymore. I felt gratitude. Later that night, after Theo had finally passed out, still half-dressed in his owl costume, I opened Evelyn's letter. It was raw, honest. She wrote about therapy, about the things her counselor uncovered, old fears, control issues, generational trauma. She admitted how long it had taken her to stop seeing people as pieces in her own puzzle. She spoke about shame, about the ache of wanting to be forgiven and knowing she had to earn it one day at a time. At the end, she wrote, I may never be the grandmother you imagined for Theo, but I hope to be the one he remembers kindly. I folded the letter and placed it next to Theo's wisdom book. We weren't perfect. We weren't polished. But we were here, together. And somehow, that was enough. Theo's 5th birthday arrived with all the anticipation of a holiday. He'd been counting down for weeks, crossing off each day on his dinosaur-themed calendar with a red crayon, announcing to anyone who would listen, "I'm almost 5 and that means I'm basically a grown-up." I indulged him, letting him pick the cake flavor, chocolate fudge with green frosting, the location, our backyard, where he insisted we turn it into a jungle, and the guest list, which included both his preschool friends and all the adults who had somehow become part of this patched-together family of ours. I woke up early that morning, before the sun even rose, and padded into the kitchen to start preparing. Balloons floated in clusters tied to chairs, the cake sat proudly in the fridge, and little paper hats lined the counter. I looked around at the decorations we'd put up the night before, streamers twisted around the porch railings, cardboard palm trees standing guard by the fence, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. By 9, the yard was filling up. Laughter spilled from the grass, kids running wild in their face paint and makeshift explorer hats. I kept an eye on Theo, who darted from station to station with his usual boundless energy, now multiplied by birthday joy. Caleb arrived not long after, holding a gift bag covered in owls and carrying 2 large pizzas because he knew, without asking, that I always worried about running out of food. "Hey, birthday mom," he said as he set them down. "You holding up?" I nodded. "Barely. He's been up since 6 asking if the cake has grown taller overnight." Caleb laughed, glancing toward the treehouse where Theo was showing his friends how to spot a T-Rex using leaf camouflage. Then he looked back at me. "You did this. All of this. He's so happy, Lena." I smiled, but the words sank deeper than I let on. Because for a long time, I wasn't sure if I could ever give Theo happiness like this. I wasn't sure if I could rebuild something solid after everything was shattered. But here we were, 5 years later. Not just surviving. Thriving. Evelyn came a little later, moving slowly but steadily up the driveway with her ever-present pearls and a gentle smile. She held a neatly wrapped gift in one hand and a small envelope in the other. "He's quite the social butterfly," she said, watching Theo race by with a butterfly net twice his size. "He gets that from me," I replied with a small smirk. She actually laughed. She handed me the envelope. "For you. Not him. Not for now." I slipped it into my purse without looking. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for letting me," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "I know that's still a choice." It was. Every invitation I extended, every moment I allowed her near him, was a decision I weighed with care. But she had earned this moment as much as anyone could. And Theo adored her. When it was finally time for cake, everyone gathered around the picnic table. The candles flickered, 5 small flames dancing above the green frosting that Theo had helped smear on the night before with far more enthusiasm than skill. I held his hand as we all sang. Caleb stood on his other side, Evelyn beside him. For the first time, we were all standing together, no tension, no hesitation. When the song ended, I leaned in and whispered, "Make a wish, baby." Theo looked around at all of us, his eyes wide, lips pressed together in concentration. Then he grinned. "I don't need a wish," he said. "I already got what I wanted." The crowd chuckled, some clapped, and I blinked back tears as he blew out the candles in one strong breath. In that moment, everything went quiet in my heart. The ache that had lived there since the day of the wedding, the shame, the anger, the grief, finally loosened its grip. After cake and games and an explosion of wrapping paper, one of the other parents offered to take a photo of all of us together. I hesitated again, but Caleb gently touched my elbow. "For Theo," he said. So I stood beside him, my hand resting on Theo's shoulder. Evelyn stood on the other side, holding the handmade card Theo had given her earlier, a new drawing of 4 birds flying together this time, their wings open wide beneath a bright sun. The shutter clicked. Once, then again. That photo now sits framed on our living room shelf. Not because it's perfect, but because it's proof of what we survived. What we chose. A mother, once left at the altar, who refused to let a lie define her. A father, once absent, now steady and present. A grandmother, once broken by fear, now soft with regret and effort. And a boy who never asked for anything but love, and got it, finally, in full. That night, after the last guest left and the house was quiet again, I sat beside Theo's bed and watched him sleep. His curls were damp from running, his hands tucked under his cheek. I leaned in and whispered, "You are my greatest truth." He didn't stir. Just smiled in his sleep, as if he'd heard me anyway. We weren't a perfect family, but we were a real one. And like the birds in his drawing, we were flying together, finally, fully, freely.